Welcome back for session 5.2. In this session, we're going to start talking about flexible boxes or flex boxes, which we're going to use to make our interface manipulate as it needs to with different devices. Let's get started. So when we talk about a flex box, we are describing a box that has a axis and then a cross axis. So in a horizontal flex box, we have a main axis that's horizontal and a cross axis that's vertical. In a vertical flex box, it's the other direction. Boxes can contain other objects, but they shrink and grow as necessary, and you can choose to manipulate your flex box in such a way so that if you have enough space, the items can go across, but if you don't have enough space, then they will move as necessary to fill in the spaces that they have. You can choose to tell it whether or not you want it to grow or shrink in certain areas, if you want it to wrap by going each row, or if you want to have it wrap in columns. And you can have some options there if you want to wrap reverse, in other words, wrapping the other direction. So there's lots of flexibility with flex boxes, no pun intended. You do have to remember that flex boxes do need some cross-browser support, so we are going to be doing that. And we're going to talk about how those flex boxes can be used. We're now going to be working on the pre-K page. So if we're on our home page, this is our pre-K page. And it's going to be describing the schedule for the pre-K classes. It's not really that important. But let's go look at that page real quick, and you'll see that it has the nav bar across the top. And then it has a schedule, and it has some classes. So a header, it's got an aside for the schedule, a section that's main, with an article, and then a section inside of that that's topics, and then the footer down at the bottom. So a couple of different things in this page we're going to be playing with. First thing we're going to do, of course, is to put in our CSS. And you can see that cleaned up our interface a little bit. It added in those colors that we wanted, but we're going to definitely be changing around how this moves and how it looks different with different types. So we're going to come over to our Flex CSS. And you can see our Flex CSS, they put in our mobile style and our tablet and desktop styles, and then our base styles. So what we're going to be doing here is adding some details to our base, and then we'll modify those as necessary for our mobile and our desktop and tablet. First, in our base, we're going to be setting up that our body is going to be in a flex style. So in our body, we're going to go ahead and do our display. And we're going to do our WebKit for flex and our regular flex. So display flex. Just saying that we're going to be using the flex style when we do this. We're also going to be doing our WebKit. I'm sorry, I put in 2 dashes. WebKit flex flow to say how is that flex going to work. And we're going to set that to row and wrap because we do want to wrap it and do the wrap. And then we're just going to do our flow, our flex flow. Flow. Here, and we're going to do the same thing, row and wrap. So our pages are going to row and wrap as we go along. Now, it did a little bit here. It did add in this little flex in here and a little bit for our details here as well. As of right now, see how that'll move down depending on where it fits nicely. That's not significant, but we are going to be starting with that and then moving forward. Each item in a flex box are called flex items, the items that exist inside of a flex box. They're very similar to floated items where they can flex or float to the left or float to the right. Except in flex items, they can actually flex down to the next column if necessary or the next row, depending on how you set it. There are three pieces of information that you can set with your flex box. The first is your flex basis, which gives you an initial size of the item. This isn't the actual size of the item. It's simply saying this is how big we would like the item to be if we could. But we move things around to make them fit nicely, so it might grow or shrink as necessary to fill in its space. You can then tell whether or not the flex grow of an item in relative to the other flexible items. In the examples given here, you can have a flex grow of 1 and a flex grow of 3, and that means that the second item will grow 3 times faster given the option. So as we increase our space or increase our browser width, that second item will grow bigger than the first item will because the growth rate is 1 to 3. We can also have a flex shrink, which allows you to shrink an item relative to other items. In the situation where I give a flex basis of 200 pixels, but I don't have 200 pixels to put it in, it's okay for it to go down to 150 or whatever the pixel sizes it needs. So remember, the flex basis is not exactly the number of pixels that you're going to be set to. It's just kind of a starting off point. So let's see how this looks with our code. When we want to apply our Flexbox layout, we are going to tell the browser or the CSS that we want to flex, and then we will give it 3 values. What is its grow value and its shrink value? And then what is the basis? Remember that value that we start with. In this situation, as with most things with HTML, it's really important for you to draw out your intended layout before you start. And think about it in all 3 screen options that you're going to be working with, whether it's a mobile, a tablet, or a desktop. If you think about that, you might be able to design your page a little bit better by understanding what is the appropriate growing and shrinking of items. What is your original basis, and how are those going to work? You can always set your flex to auto, which will automatically resize it, assuming that we had a grow and a shrink basis of 1. So if you set all of your items to grow and shrink of 1 or to use auto, that means they will all grow and shrink at the same rate as they move bigger or smaller based on the size that they can. You can also create an inflexible item that will not grow or shrink. It's where it's 0 and 0, and then auto would be whatever size fits in there, but it doesn't allow it to grow or shrink as that increases or decreases. So a couple of different options in applying your layout. Rather than using 2 different style sheets, you can use the flex layout to apply the same style sheet with the same code depending on what your situation is. So that way you don't have to worry about setting things for your mobile or your tablet or your desktop, because the flex layout will adjust as necessary. When we want to define our flex layout, we are going to be putting in our headers and our asides and our sections so that those go the way that we want them to. So the first thing we're going to do is our header and our footer. We want them to always have a width of 100%. That's because those are going to go across the top and across the bottom, and we don't want them to flex. We want the header and then of course our footer at the bottom. We don't want those to be flexed. We want those always to be 100%. The next is our aside. And with our aside, we're going to do our WebKit flex. And we're going to set that to our 3, 1, and 361 pixels. Then, of course, we're going to do our regular flex at 3, 1, and 361 pixels. So that will set it so our aside fills in our space here the way that we wanted it to. If we make it bigger or smaller, those are still there. So if I scroll down a little bit, see how everything still looks fine. Okay. The next section we're going to do is our main. So we are going to do our section, main. And we're going to do a similar thing with our flex. I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste just because it makes my life easier. And we're going to do those. I'm so sorry. The WebKit flex for the aside is 1, 1, and 120. That makes more sense. we go. I was going to say that looked a little bit strange. So 1/4 and 3/4, we're going to be setting that up. This is going to be 120 pixels versus 360 pixels over here. And you can see it will go ahead and increase and decrease as necessary. We're going to keep playing around with that to make these work a little bit different. But for right now, that's exactly what I wanted it to do. What I want to see here real quick before I stop is what does it look like on my mobile device? And as you can see, it's all in one column the way that I want it to. You can scroll down from my schedule to my classes and have the details of the classes, but it fills in the way that I would like it to, and I can still always go back. So I made sure that my mobile site still looks fine. At this point, we're going to start working with our topics, which are these sections right here, our language and our math and our science. And we want to have those do flexing, which is really important for this because as we increase and decrease our size, we can fit more of them in there if we have a larger screen. So we're going to come down and we're going to go to sections that are in the ID of topics. And then we are going to do our display and our flex flow. I'm just going to actually copy and paste because I can. With our web flex and then our row and our wrap for those pieces of information. And then we're going to come down and set the actual articles. So section, topics, and in this case, we're going to use the article. And then in our article, we're going to set our web flex and our flex, our WebKit flex and our flex. So we're going to actually flex these for each of these different articles. And in these cases, I'm going to do 1:1 because I want them to be at the same ratio. And I'm going to put them at 200 pixels a piece. I think 200 pixels is probably a good size. Obviously, it's not always going to be that option, but it'll be close. So when we refresh now, you'll see that now they put them side by side. As my screen gets smaller and it can't fit that 200, it'll go back to the next size, but it'll go ahead and fill. As my screen gets bigger, it'll go ahead and get to that large size until it gets to the maximum amount that it's allowed to be. So that's how we can use the flex flow to work with our articles. So we want to apply the same flexing on our menu items for our desktop and our tablets only. Because remember, with our mobile, it's already taken care of. We don't need to deal with it. But we do want to change our navigation. So in this case, we want to go ahead and do our navigation, our unordered list, and we want to make that be our web flex. Remember, we want the parent item to be our web flex. Or our flex. And we're going to do our row wrap option there as well. And then our items, we are going to have those be the items that we assign flex to. So in this case, we are going to let those be auto for their size. And the reason we want them to be auto is because we want them to fill as necessary, but we want them to grow and shrink as they can. And that way they go across the top. So now that you can see them, they're up at the top like this. And as you see, as we make them bigger or smaller, they will fill that whole section as necessary to fill in with our flexing. And they'll get smaller as necessary as well. Sometimes when you design your page, if you're designing it for a desktop, you might have some items hanging out over on the left-hand side that are kind of asides. They're just sitting there and you don't really want those to be front and center in your mobile. So you might want to move the ordering of items. This is kind of like being able to take all of the items inside of your HTML and break them up and say, I want this one to come first, this one to come second, this one to come third. You can reorder your page layout with the order attribute. Orders can technically be negative. A negative order will come first and then positive numbers. And we can do this to make sure that certain items always start at the top, certain items always start at the bottom, certain items are always first or second or so on throughout. And we're going to see how that works with our project that we've been working on. So now we're going to be setting up our mobile device. And in this case, we don't want to have the schedule at the top. We want the first thing they see to be the classes, and we want that schedule to come down at the bottom. So we're going to be adding an ordering to our aside and our footer, because we want those to make sure that they go to the bottom. We're only going to do this in the mobile devices media query because we only want this to happen for the mobile devices. The rest of them are fine where they are. So we are going to do our WebKit order, because remember this is going to be cross-browser support, and order 99. And then we're going to go ahead and do our footer. And we're going to do the same concept, but we're going to make that 100 so that the footer comes after our aside. And when we refresh it now, you can see that it starts by having our pre-K classes, and then it has the schedule at the bottom. So we were able to reorder where we wanted that to go. That's how that ordering works. With our Flexbox layout, there are different styles that we can do to design our page so that it works the way we want. As you know, if we did a flex left or a float left or a float right, and we had a certain percentage in there, we could have them all shift over to the left side or all shift over to the right side. You can do the same concepts with Flexboxes. When you think about them, think of the justified content attribute is going to be just a single line. How do you want things to be on a line? Do you want them to be centered? Do you want them to have the space between them equaled? Do you want to have the space around them equal, or do you want to have them all at the beginning or the end of the line? This is for a single line of items. We can also choose to align the content of multiple lines, being able to be at the flex start or flex end, being able to stretch to fill our space, which is a really useful one if you want to fill your space nicely. We can also choose to have them all in the center, or again, that space between or space around option. And the last one is our align items. And this goes across your cross axis as opposed to across your main axis. This is going to be, how do you want it to be across your cross axis? Do you want them all at the top or the bottom? Do you want to have them in the center? Again, that kind of like a vertical versus a horizontal alignment, but we call it align items, and it's only applied to flex boxes. But this gives you some options on how you want your items to stretch or to fill the space given. There is also the concept of align self, where you can use the alignments to apply to a single item in a block. So in a Flexbox. So those are your different Flexbox layouts. The last thing we're going to talk about is our Navicon menu. So this little Navicon, there's a couple of words for it. Navicon is one of the main ones. Some people call it the hamburger symbol. It's the three little lines in a cell phone, generally in a cell phone, that say that there's a menu underneath me. So if I click that, I know that the menu is going to pop up. Remember, when we're dealing with mobile devices, it's always very important to remember real estate, and we don't want to fill things that are not necessary in our real estate. So a big thing we like to do is make sure that our menu only shows up when we ask it to. So in this case, we have our menu currently statically there. We're going to actually have it drop up so that when we click that Navicon menu, then it'll pop down, it'll be there when we need it, and then it'll go away when we don't. So this is definitely a hover and click to show or hide your menu. The last section in this session is going to be our Navicon. So in a mobile device, we like to have those three little lines, the Navicon, just to help us. So we're going to come over to our pre-K, and we are going to add our Navicon here. I've actually already done it as a link. So it'll be a link. It's in between from our nav before we get to our unordered list, and we're going to have the image being the Navicon image that we've already done. We're also going to include its own style sheet. That's going to mean that we don't have to keep all of the Navicon stuff on our main style sheet. We can use a separate style sheet. It's just fine. And apply that one last so that you know that it gets done. So we've created the Navicon style sheet with just some comments, and then of course our at rule for max width of 480, which is just our media, our mobile devices. And in this section, we are going to be adding our Navicon under a base style. So we're going to say A, if it's A, and it has a name of Navicon. We are going to tell it to display nothing. That will make it so that it doesn't show up. It doesn't show up on our desktop either. So not on our desktop, not here. It's okay. We're going to go put it back. So now when we get down into our media only, here we can say our Navicon has a display of block. And that will add it only to our mobile devices, but not to our desktop, because we don't want it on our desktop. We only want it on our mobile device. Now we need to make it go away. So if we did our nav horizontal, and you should kind of know where I'm going with this one. We're going to set the unordered list of the horizontal to display none, because we don't want it to show unless you hover over that Navicon. So as you can see, we made it go away. Now we have to make it so that if you hover over it, it actually shows back up. So we're going to say if you have an A Navicon, and you're hovering, and you have an unordered list underneath you, which they do, or you are in a nav horizontal, and you have an unordered list that you're hovering over. So if you're still hovering over the list, then we want to show it as well, or we want to show it to anything that is called a Navicon that has an unordered list underneath it. And in this case, we're going to set the display back to block. What that's going to do is allow us to hover over this to make it show. If we click off of it, it goes away. We hover over it, and if we move in between these things, it'll also stay open. So when you have this on an actual device, if you're hovering over and you're looking at them, they'll stay open until you click something. Or you can just click off of it to make it go away. And that's how we can really use that real estate in our mobile device. So we have the information that we really want people to see at the top. If you want to scroll down to find the schedule, that's fine, even though we can have it in the aside when we're doing our regular desktop page. So thanks for watching session 2. Come back again for session 3, and we will talk about our print media. How do we make things look good when we print them?